So let's talk recruiting. I know a lot of you are thinking Dylan Raiola, as he is the #1 recruit on many recruiting sites. But for our Nebraska football team, is he really the right fit here? I mean, are we just drooling over him because he's a great quarterback, or because he's the #1 player in the nation and he happens to have Nebraska on his list? Maybe he doesn't really fit Satterfield's and Rule's offense. We ought to keep that in mind. Casey Thompson just left, and maybe he realized their system they're going to run isn't right for him. Or maybe he and his father watched the spring game and saw 3 true freshmen that played in high school just a year ago run through this offensive line like butter. And he's probably thinking, I just went through surgery and rehab, and I'm not going to go through that again. So maybe that was one of his reasons why he decided, maybe it's my last year, maybe I need to go find me a better team with a better offensive line. You got to think about Casey Thompson played at Texas and played in Nebraska. So he was on a Texas team that had a pretty bad offensive line and scrambled his way through some pretty good numbers. And then he transfers and comes to Nebraska with, to me, a worse offensive line and did the same thing. To me, Casey Thompson is the real deal. You got to look in between the lines. I saw him. He made when he had a chance, he made some real good decisions. And the good thing I liked about him is he was on the run a lot. Because of the offensive line, he had to scramble out of there a lot. And he always kept his eyes downfield. He always kept looking for that receiver. He really didn't think of running very often. To the point at times I thought, maybe he should have ran, but he never did. So that's a sign of a pretty good quarterback. He keeps his eyes downfield, and he's wanting to throw, and that's going to get him a long ways in the National Football League. So I kind of wondered if Casey just thought, maybe I need to go find me a team. I think he'll end up landing somewhere in the SEC, maybe Auburn. I've heard Florida mentioned. It wouldn't surprise me if he landed in Alabama with Nick Saban. I know that Alabama just signed that transfer out of Notre Dame. But to me, Casey's a better quarterback. Casey Thompson is an NFL quarterback to me, and some of you might be laughing at that. But if he went somewhere with a decent offensive line, I know one thing. If I was a quarterback, give me a good offensive line and average receivers. I'd take that way over than I would have a bad offensive line and great receivers, because they ain't going to care what kind of receivers you have. You're not going to get the ball to them on your back. So I could see him going there and having a real good year and being drafted maybe, fourth or fifth round, depending how well he did. And it's a good thing, too, because, if you're an elite quarterback, top 5 quarterback, you're usually going to go to a pretty bad team in the NFL because you're going to be one of the first 5 picks. Then you're probably going to be behind a team with another bad offensive line. Plus, him going through these three years with Texas and Nebraska got him ready for the NFL to be behind maybe a line. He's not going to get behind a line in the NFL that's worse than what he had at Texas and Nebraska, or they wouldn't be in the NFL. He might be behind some pretty bad offensive lines, but they're not going to be as bad as them. But if he goes in the later rounds, there's a good chance he could end up to a better team. He might be a backup at the beginning and have to show himself. But I think we're going to see Casey Thompson. I think he's going to lead a team one day in the NFL. You mark my word on that. But kind of getting off track here. This is more of a recruiting. But Dylan Raiola is not what we ought to be looking at. As Nebraska fans, we shouldn't be looking at Dylan Raiola. Don't get me wrong. I'd love to see Dylan come. I loved his dad. Dominic was a great player, so I wouldn't mind just seeing Dylan come to Nebraska. But there's really other players, mainly 2 other players, that to me should be more important than Dylan Raiola. As you know, the Huskers have been fine finding their quarterbacks the last 2 or 3 years in the transfer portal, and that might be the best way to find your quarterback at such a important position if you think about it. There's always quarterbacks in there. On top of that, you now have film on them at the college level. See if they fit your system, how well they did. So to me, that might be the better way to go than trying to grab a 17 or 18-year-old kid out of high school, because that's a crapshoot. Yes, he might be the best quarterback out there, or maybe he gets there and can't he flops and he's not worth anything. Maybe he can't handle the big crowds or the media or the millions watching him on television. There could be many reasons. At least with a transfer, you can choose one that kind of fits your system and have the film, like I said. And then you got the coaches you could lean on that he played it with and get their thoughts on what kind of player he is, what kind of person he is. So to me, as much as I'd love to have Dylan come to Lincoln, he's not as important to me as BB. And BB to me is that number one offensive tackle in Brandon Baker out of California, and his teammate, the defensive lineman that came, Aiden Breland, or even players like defensive lineman Williams Inwanari. These are the players to me that are way more important, especially Brandon Baker on that offensive line. So what do we think? Do we have a shot at these players? Well, let's look at offensive tackle Brandon Baker, the number one offensive lineman in the nation. And I feel we have a great shot at landing this young man. And if we could pull in Brandon, we have a pretty good shot of maybe pulling in his teammates, the defensive lineman Aiden Breland, or even the running back Nate Frazier, as they all play ball at the same high school, and they all have shown interest together in Lincoln. I know for a fact that all three are really impressed with the Huskers and the coaching staff, especially Brandon Baker and Nate Frazier. They both have talked to Nebraska a few times, and even to other recruits. The only reason the defensive lineman Aiden Breland even showed up to the spring game in Lincoln was because of Brandon Baker going back home and telling him he needs to check out the Huskers. He needs to go there. And so he came along with Brandon, and he, again, was impressed with the city, with the fans, and with the coaching staff. So I feel if we can get these players back for an official visit, that we can grab these players, especially Brandon. I think if we get him on an official visit, especially we could get him like maybe during the season, because he's already announced that he plans to wait until December to make his announcement and where he's going. So we could get him to a real game during the season. And if Rule Company can show some improvement this year, maybe say they can pull out six or seven wins in a bowl game, then I feel we have a great shot in landing Brandon Baker. Now, I know with Aiden Breland, he wants to make his decision on where he's going before he starts his senior season, so probably late July or August. So the Huskers have their work cut out for them with him. But he did say he wanted to take one of his official visits to Lincoln, and that's a big plus because we all know if they officially choose Lincoln to visit, then it's definitely the team they're interested in. No one says, I want to go to Lincoln, Nebraska for vacation. If they're taking an official visit at Miami or Los Angeles, it could be the city too. They're one of the reasons why they're going. But so if you get someone that does an official visit in Nebraska, then they're truly interested on them. Now for defensive lineman Williams Inwanari, man, this guy's a special player. And I know for the Huskers to get him, it's going to be a long shot. This is one player I feel is going to be a top 10 draft pick in 3 or 4 years. You mark my word. I've watched this young man live in a game, and he kind of reminds me of Dominic and Sue. He could dominate a game one-on-one. He's currently leaning Oklahoma, and I heard leaning Oklahoma pretty big. But if we could get him on an official visit and our defense can look as good as they did in the spring game this upcoming season, man, then you never know. We could grab him. It is a long shot, but we could. Now, other players I feel the Huskers are in pretty good shape to get a commitment out of is Isaiah McMorris out of the Omaha area. McMorris is a 6 foot, 170 pounds, so I can see him probably playing wide receiver, but could easily be switched to the defensive side depending on his strength and conditioning once he gets here. The great thing about Coach Rule is don't count any of these players that come here always playing the position that they came in at, as Rule is the master at finding the right position for each player and getting the most out of them. So I guarantee some of these players that come in will end up on the other side of the ball than what they originally arrived at. Once they put on that muscle, that weight during strength conditioning and show what they have, as you know, Rule likes giving everyone reps at multiple positions just to see where they shine the best at. And keep in mind, giving them reps at multiple positions, even if they don't plan on playing that position, does a lot of things. It constantly gives them live reps. And lets them look at a position, the playbook, and what that position is looking for when it's running either the offense or defense, which could end up helping him even if they stay where they normally stay. Examples with A.J. Rollins. About the time he finishes here in Lincoln, he's going to be an NFL caliber defender. The others that are looking towards the Huskers are wide receiver Davon Hall out of Bellevue, Nebraska. Davon is 6'2", 190 pounds, and could also grow into, instead of a wide receiver, he could be a big wide receiver, or he could end up growing into a tight end, or even again on that defensive side, an edge player, depending again on his strength and conditioning once he gets there. Terrence Shelton is another player I feel could come to Lincoln. He's a running back out of Wisconsin. Yeah, I know you guys thinking that's a long shot, especially grabbing a running back out of Wisconsin when right now Wisconsin is basically running back U now. It used to be Nebraska. Now it seems like that's Wisconsin. Terrence is 6'1", 200 pounds with some pretty good speed. So he's got good size and strength. So he'd be a plus if Nebraska could end up lining him. So Nebraska has a decent shot of grabbing him. Now, to the players that have committed since my last video when I gave my predictions, I know they committed later than I thought they would, but I was right on with offensive lineman Gibson Pyle and tight end Ian Flint. Both are out of the Houston area. Gibson Pyle's out of Klein, Texas, which is just north of Houston. And Ian Flint is out of Katy, Texas, which is just west of Houston. And I said in my video a month ago when they visited that these two would commit, and I thought they would commit during that March 25th weekend, but ended up committing a little bit later. But I was pretty right on them. Another one I was pretty right on was Willis McGahee, the fourth. As I said in that video, if we could get McGahee here for that spring game, that we had a great chance of grabbing his commitment. And that's exactly what happened, as he committed right after getting here with his family on April 21st, really the day before the game. I know a lot of you are still wondering about Dylan Raiola. Like I said before, I'd love to have Dylan come to Lincoln, as his dad was a great player here. I just feel Dylan wants to go to Georgia. I think he kind of, doesn't mean he doesn't like Nebraska. He does like Nebraska. He likes the feel of Nebraska. He loves the fans. But I think he's always been leaning Georgia. And I think if it wasn't for his uncle and for his father, he probably already would have committed to Georgia. But I know he really wants to go to Georgia more than he really wants to go to Lincoln and give his father and his uncle what they want. Now, don't get me wrong. Dylan has changed his mind, changed teams a couple of times already. You know, he committed to Ohio State, then decommitted, then had Georgia and then USC on his radar as leading candidates. Then it looked like he was leaning towards the Huskers, and now he's back towards Georgia. So I could see him going really anywhere. He could switch and end up going to USC. I could even see him all of a sudden at the end, none of us were right, and he goes to Oregon. But I do know his dad and his uncle would love for him to come to the Huskers, and I'm sure they're putting little hints in there and probably doing what little things they can, maybe trying to get him here. But the one thing we're going to have to do is get him on an official visit. Right now, I think his only official visit still is Georgia on June 2nd. So we're going to have to get him on an official visit, because we don't. It wouldn't surprise me on his official visit on June 2nd. It wouldn't surprise me if he goes ahead and commits to Georgia. But hey, you never know. I could see Dylan switching back to the Huskers. But if not, there's still the transfer portal a couple years later. And honestly, you have to ask, does like I said, does Dylan even fit Rule and Satterfield's style of quarterback? And maybe that's what's in question, and ultimately led Dylan to start leaning more towards Georgia again, because that seemed all of a sudden right after that big March 25th visit. Maybe he came in, sat down with Satterfield, sat down with Rule. Maybe he kind of saw the offense they were planning on running. It kind of seems like Rule wants to come back a little bit towards the old school running game, maybe with a combination of the new school spread. So to me, it's more important for the Huskers to be concentrating on grabbing Brandon Baker and fixing that offensive line, as I feel Brandon Baker probably is a top 15, maybe even a top 10 NFL draft choice once he leaves here. And no matter what, he'll do wonders helping any quarterback that ends up playing behind him. Again, I want to thank everyone for their support. As y'all know, I went through cancer, and you could see I've had my surgery. Everything seemed to go okay. I've been recuperating the last couple weeks. I think they said they got most of it. It ended up being stage 3 cancer, and I will be starting radiation therapy probably in another 3 or 4 weeks. They want to let this heal all up before I start it. And I don't know what that's going to do to me. As long as I have the energy to do it, I'm going to continue creating these videos for all our great fans of the Huskers and anyone else, I guess, that jumps on and want to laugh at me for who I predict or what I say. And again, I want to thank everyone for supporting me and the channel, as it really means a whole lot to me. And if you don't mind, please subscribe and help me try to get to 1,000 subscribers. That would mean a whole lot to me. But again, thank you to everyone. And until the next video, go Big Red.